Chairman and the Ranking Member and distinguished members of the committee for having us here today. The people of the state of Missouri watched in horror as the left's direct assault on President Trump manifested itself in the form of a corrupt prosecution of the president, which resulted in an errant criminal conviction. We are a nation of laws that are supposed to be equally applied. Instead, the left has prioritized its hatred of President Trump above the rule of law. To put it plainly, the left hates President Trump more than they love this country. The term lawfare, while apt, fails to adequately convey the moral depravity underpinning this strategic attack. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office recent prosecution of President Trump represents one of the most morally abhorrent volleys in the left's ongoing barrage of lawfare. This prosecution was politically motivated and is replete with legal error. First, prosecutors are explicitly forbidden from waging politically motivated prosecutions. To the extent a prosecutor is self-interested in a case, that prosecutor must recuse himself. That did not happen in New York. Mr. Bragg was previously involved in civil litigation against President Trump, campaigned on a promise to prosecute President Trump, and then recruited the third highest ranking official from President Biden's Department of Justice to lead his trial court efforts against President Biden's political opponent. Second, the indictment charges President Trump with 34 counts of falsifying business records for making entries in records with, quote unquote, the intent to commit another crime. The charge's reference to an unidentifiable other crime constitutes a deprivation of due process by denying the president a right to be informed of the crimes for which he is charged. Third, the prosecutor sought an unconstitutional gag order in this case. There's a strong presumption against gag orders as violative of an individual's First Amendment right to free speech. Bear in mind, the right to free speech protects not only the speaker, but Americans' right to hear from a presidential candidate. Fourth, the prosecutor perverted the law to meet the facts rather than objectively apply the facts to the law. The statute at issue prohibits a false entry into a business record. However, the financial entries were authentic in that the entities listed received the funds enumerated in the documents. The prosecutor illegally bent the law to allege that these transactions were accurately recorded were for some other purpose. Fifth, the prosecutor failed to correct the court's error in instructing the jury that unanimity was not required as to the predicate offense that forms the basis for the fallacious charges. The Sixth Amendment right to trial by jury includes jury unanimity as to each element of the offense for which the defendant is tried. The prosecutor had an affirmative duty to object to this violation of President Trump's constitutional rights. Missouri has a unique history that parallels much of what recently happened in New York, with the exception that systems in Missouri countered a rogue prosecutor who filed politically motivated cases. In fact, I filed the lawsuit that ultimately removed her from office and prevented this kind of lawfare. George Soros has repeatedly funded progressive prosecutors who wreak havoc on the criminal justice system at every level. Not only do they prosecute political opponents, but they refuse to prosecute actual violent crimes happening in our communities. In fact, President Biden's Department of Justice is in lockstep with radicals like George Soros and is actively funding groups like the Vera Institute that are turning our streets into war zones. The Vera Institute, a progressive organization dedicated to undermining criminal prosecution in the United States, receives tens of millions of dollars in federal funds annually. My lawsuit to remove the prosecutor in the city of St. Louis uncovered the disastrous relationship between her office and the Vera Institute that resulted in more than a 90% non-prosecution rate of reported crimes. Meanwhile, the St. Louis prosecutor had to be disqualified from cases in which she was politically motivated. Missouri's systems worked in that the judiciary prevented her political witch hunts, and my lawsuit removed her from office after she neglected to prosecute violent crime. The same systems failed in New York. George Soros has funded Alvin Bragg's candidacy, and under his watch, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has partnered with the Vera Institute. And in this case, the judiciary in New York failed to disqualify Alvin Bragg from his case against President Trump. These facts, coupled with the federal and state prosecutions that have yet to play out, display a level of collusion never seen before between a corrupt Department of Justice and illicitly motivated state prosecutors. I believe the investigations and subsequent prosecutions of President Trump have been illegally conducted in coordination with the Department of Justice. That is why my office demanded communications between the DOJ, Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, Jack Smith, or Fani Willis related to the investigation or prosecution of former President Donald Trump. In order to protect the rights of all Missourians who plan to participate in the 2024 presidential election, the state of Missouri has the right to know what extent the prosecutions of prominent presidential candidates are being coordinated by the federal government, which is currently run by President Trump's primary political opponent. The credibility of our criminal justice system has been undermined and hangs in the balance. If we are to protect the rule of law, we must end the lawfare against President Trump. As a nation, we must affirmatively reject Soros-backed prosecutors who refuse to enforce the law and instead weaponize the criminal justice system to achieve political ends. As a nation, we must eliminate the Vera Institute's influence over the DOJ and our local prosecutors' offices. I want to thank the chairman and ranking member and distinguished members of the committee.